In the spirit of full disclosure and setting some context for what I'm about to say, I have a few disclaimers. I'm not going to talk about history of the ERS.
Oh, sorry.
I mean, if I had heard Barbara's and Bob's talk this morning, what I would have written in the last 15 years would be very different. But I wrote this in response to the title of the sessions some time ago, so I went overseas a month or two ago. My comments are based on my 20 years within the disciplineless unit called Environmental Resource Studies here, the undisciplined unit. It's not the faculty, it's the department within the faculty. And then my comments are also colored by more than 20 years as an academic geographer in geography departments, and that included some major editorial service to the discipline. What all this means is I don't have the historical chops that Bob has developed with environmental thinking. Second, I think we confuse our thinking about the topic by not clearly separating teaching from research concerns. This is forced upon us by university structures, institutional structures. Be great researchers so we can claim how many Nobel Prize winners we've got, how much money we're bringing into the Tri-Council. Oh, by the way, teach more and more undergraduates. And I found it, certainly as chair, very difficult to manage both demands. Chair, by the way, is the weakest position in the university structure. Third, I do believe that the universe of knowledge that the university purports to encompass should have room for integration as well as reductionism, breadth as well as depth, social critique as well as empiricism. And that universities should be about learning, not job training. So I'm old-fashioned in this regard, extremely old-fashioned. And my comments are going to specifically refer to undergraduate education. That's my take on this. And last point is I'm not going to sing the title of my talk. So my apologies to Joni Mitchell. But as I was casting about what to say in response to the invitation from Doug and Tim a year ago, both sides now popped into my head one day, firmly lodged there. And as I think more and more about the lyrics, I think that that early song by Joni Mitchell is perhaps the anthem for the development of environmental studies and where we should go. It's interesting from my past experience that I was on a panel very much like this one at the annual meetings of the Association of American Geographers on the 20th anniversary of Earth Day. I remarked that we were sitting in an artificially lit hotel room, navel-gazing, fretting over the future of the discipline, while City Hall Square across the street was alive with activities marking Earth Day. A significant number, anniversary 20th. It struck me that what I had thought as a student and as a young prof was the exemplary interdisciplinary discipline had rather lost its way in the grove of academia. It couldn't see the forest for the trees. Geography, I once thought, combined both social and physical processes and patterns, but in reality, very few geographers as individuals could encompass all of that since the early 20th century French geographers. But efforts were underway to further compartmentalize the discipline at that time. Climatological colleagues thought me a traitor. I believe that's the word one of them used, because as editor of a geography journal, I didn't support the move to create a much more focused physical geography journal. I wanted the journals to encompass the breadth of what the discipline was interested in. When I joined ERS a year or two after that, about 20 years ago, I was astounded by the vision that it held that ignored disciplinary bounds. And if I think about my colleagues in the department today, we've got geography, political studies, international affairs, biology, ecology, health sciences, dentistry actually, philosophy, and the foci of our interests are water governance, alternative energies, food networks, global governance, urban policy, human health in the world. So very diverse. It took me probably 20 years to learn what environmental studies was and how to encompass all this within an academic unit. In the 20 years, I've seen prodigious growth, both in our department in the faculty here and in the field of environmental studies. Our first year intake is more than doubled to something more than 100 majors a year now. This year, of course, down, but in terms of applicants. Our master's program has tripled to about 20 a year. We've added a PhD program. We're contemplating adding an additional non-thesis master's program or two. Our faculty complement went from 11 to 6 in a previous budget cutting exercise, but is now 13 and soon to be 15, and perhaps even more. And I think this growth parallels the nationwide proliferation of interest in environmental studies. The number of programs has expanded from the original 2 to something in excess of 50 4 years on. And much of that growth has been in the last decade. If we are looking for indicators that we do not need to worry about whether we're making a difference, I think that these data might serve to answer unequivocally, yes, we are. Students are coming to us. Excuse me. There's a move afoot to change our name because environmental resource studies doesn't say what we do, but then it's hard to encapsulate what we do in a single name. And ERS, as an acronym, has a lot of traction out there for students to apply here. Geography doesn't. In addition to growth, we've also matured, I think, as a field of study. I hope that we recognize the relative simplicity of early notions of carrying capacity and sustainable development. Yes, we can still see these concepts underlying our approach to the world, but we've grown, I hope, I'm sure we have, to recognize that we are living in a complex socio-ecological system. No discipline in itself is sufficient to characterize the many dimensions of the problems we are coping with, or trying to cope with. A multidisciplinary approach in which each makes its contribution, someone tries to knit all of them together into some sort of summary, is also way too simple. Interdisciplinarity, where disciplines talk to each other before and during the search for solutions, identifying what is needed from each, is the flavor of the month or the year or the decade. But it, I think, too, is insufficient. I think it privileges the notion that answers are rooted in disciplinary understanding. I think, rather, we need something like transdisciplinarity, where the very questions themselves are framed apart from disciplinary concerns. As a simple example, I think most of us would agree what we need is not environmental management, but management of ourselves with respect to living in the environment. Surely complex system thinking is something that we've gained. Rather than simplifying systems cateris paribus, we are challenged to recognize the many operative drivers and barriers. We come face to face with thresholds to stability of our systems. We're presented with ways to make adjustments to pull back from the edge of catastrophic failure. We learn to see creative potential in failure or destruction. We have the opportunity to create the vision of the future we want and to design pathways towards it. We have tools for assessing not just impact on our activity, but also to measure our progress towards sustainability. What better place to be engaged in this kind of work than in a unit of environment or environmental studies, or whatever you want to give it. In ERS, we attempt to instill this interdisciplinary way of thinking amongst our students and our undergraduate students. And unlike some people who spoke yesterday, I think it is appropriate and possible to offer undergraduate students training and experience in transdisciplinary thinking. It was the genius of George Francis, the founder of our department, popped in yesterday for just a bit, to design our core to do this. The core program, as I said earlier, about half the program is required within our unit or the faculty. The other half is anywhere the student wants outside in the rest of the university. The core really emphasizes the breadth, the transdisciplinary thinking. The elective part of the program allows the student to develop the depth that they want or feel they need for whatever their purpose is. So what I've said so far represents something gained, and I think it does, What's the other side of the promise on my title? What might we be losing, or I fear we may be losing? First is the question of growth. It's good for BIUs and for budgets, but it confronted me in my recent time as chair with really serious challenges to preserving our pedagogical model. Our pedagogical model was one-on-one, student-professor advising and working together right from first year, from the very earliest times, and an emphasis on self-directed, student-selected, student-centered project work. It used to be from first year, we're down to making the senior honors thesis an elective. So far, it looks like 2/3 to 3/4 of the students are still choosing the elective, still choosing the thesis option, but making it an elective as opposed to requiring it as part of the experience, I think is the wrong way to go for what we're trying to accomplish. That is being forced upon us by growth. The reason for growth has been talked about the last day and a half by many other people. So I think that's something that might be wrong. The second thing is a bit more abstract. What drew many of us to environmental studies, what excites us about environmental studies, is not the promise of a job. If that were the case, there are lots of other ways to attain accountancy, for example. Can you imagine being 17 years old and saying, I want my career to be an accountant? It boggles my mind. Rather, I think what brought us is the wonder and emotion we feel about being in the natural world, about being alive on the planet. Such feelings of wonder and emotion are often rooted in childhood experiences with family and the formation of a sense of intimacy with the planet. In our focus about being about solutions, quote unquote, as my former dean had it, I fear we may risk narrowing our view and concentrating on parts at the expense of a vision of the whole. A focus on job-related skills may displace from our curricula courses that foster broad-based thinking, wonder, an opportunity to explore, an opportunity to capitalize on those primal feelings. In the universe of thinking that the Academy supposedly represents, I think that there should be room for, to just draw some recent examples from students I've advised in senior honors work, exploration of the multifaceted relationships between nature and fashion, the expression of environmental thought and ethic in music and the arts, or the creation of a community Earth Day celebration by a parade of the species. Alternative education. In the March-April issue of Orion, if you don't know the magazine, I highly recommend it. In the recent issue of Orion, the editors write, quote, "The gravity of the environmental crisis calls for direct action. Without scientific, technological, and political intervention, we will never create the kind of world we all want to live in. But we will also not create that world if we fail to cultivate the intimacy with nature. Intimacy builds feeling. Feeling builds connection, and connection leads to conviction. And we will absolutely need conviction if we are to stand by the things we love and stand up to the forces that threaten them." Unquote. That is, I think, the courage to say I love you right out loud, as John would have said it. I hope as we move forward in defining our ES programs, what we may call them, we will embrace both sides and allow room for passion and for fostering development of the conviction that draws our students.
I love you too, Paul. I just met him by So, Dr. Naharado Sewa Guego, Ayawan G. Sewa Dakaride, Dana Sewa Tsanuni, Dana Guego Skan. So, greetings everybody, and I bring you greetings of health, peace, and happiness. So, very happy to be here today, and I want to thank Tim and Doug for organizing all of this, and thank you also to York University and for University of Toronto for bringing these things together, and for the University of Waterloo for hosting us in this beautiful facility. So thank you so much. Thank you to you also for coming out this morning. And I know that everybody's got busy things to do, and family and community and everything else. So I really appreciate your time in coming out and being able to participate with us here. I also want to thank both, and I apologize for missing this morning's session. We came in from Tyendinaga in Napanee, Belleville this morning, so I drove in. I'm teaching out there for the week, so I missed both Barbara and Robert's presentation this morning, but I'm very happy to be here with them, as both of them were my teachers when I was doing my graduate work at York and in my undergraduate at Trent. So Bob was one of my first professors way back then, and I was only 15, so I was a gifted child. As you can see, Robert was, he was only probably not too much older than me. I think he was 20 years old, gifted professor, and so we've had a long relationship together, so I'm very happy to be in the room, and I'm very happy to be here with you today. So I want to talk to you, I guess, about a couple of important things, and sort of going on a little bit what happened this morning, and a little bit, again, what Paul is talking about. To give you some background around Indigenous environmental studies, and if I get time, I'm going to talk about this idea of knowledge interaction and how knowledge systems can work together. Let me tell you a little bit about me. I'm a Mohawk. My name is Roroya Gaywin. It means he clears the sky. I'm a Mohawk from Grand River. I'm a Turtle Clan. Grand River, as many of you know, is the sort of the center for Six Nations here in Canada, and our central capital is in Onondaga in Syracuse, New York, and that's where I grew up. I came to school in Scarborough. I did a little bit of high school, went to Trent and did my undergraduate degree, and then I went on, worked a number of jobs, and then I went on and did my graduate work at York in both the MES program and the PhD program in environmental studies. I really enjoyed my graduate experience. It was a great place to go to school, great faculty, just a great opportunity to learn. So those of you that are students, really, I know sometimes it's a little bit difficult and hard, but really cherish your graduate years, because now there is no other time in your life that you're going to have a chance to read, to talk, to think, to dream, to create. So really use this time well and use it to your benefit. So from that, one of the jobs that I did have in the early 90s, I worked with Ministry of Natural Resources. At that time, with the ministry, I had a chance to travel. It was under the Bob Rae government, so the NDP came in, and they were all about building partnerships and building relationships. One of the partnerships that they wanted to build was with the Aboriginal people, so they hired me to help to develop a relationship between First Nations communities and the Ministry of Natural Resources in the area of resource management, and in particular for communities around the area of looking at economic opportunities for communities to help support communities in the development of natural resources. So as time went on, I got a chance to travel all around the country, and as usual, there was some great ideas but little money to help support the development of programs. But we started some things in communities, aquaculture programs, forestry programs. We started some restoration programs as well for surrounding areas. So we had a really good opportunity to, I guess, really have involve communities, and to at the same time to bring ideas and concepts to the monolith of M&R. So with kind of that in mind, oftentimes it was almost like speaking two different languages. Excuse me. In the nature of government and Indigenous communities, oftentimes it's like this, and where we were trying to get to was like this, and oftentimes, and most regularly, it was like this. So we had a lot of work ahead of us to try to smooth things over, to try to have communities and government begin to work together. There's a lot of history with Indigenous communities, and in particular around government and our relationship to government, but specifically around our relationship to M&R and around access to hunting, fishing, and natural resources and gathering. So from that instance, I had a chance to travel around the different communities. One of the things I was really privileged to do was to meet with many of the technicians and people working in communities, their elders and their teachers, to talk about what are the environmental issues that communities are facing. And so what we found was it was a huge area. It was everything from housing and access to resources, all the way to water, to infrastructure, to solid waste management. So we had a huge internal dynamic that was happening inside of the community. And then from there, there was the external ones that were coming from the outside impacting the community as well. So industrialization in the area in particular of contaminants and toxins from industry and resource development that was impacting water, air, and land and biological life that supported those communities living in those areas. So we had a lot of opportunity to begin to discuss how are you communities dealing with the normal path of I guess really I can't say issue resolution, but the normal path was hiring consultants, writing some reports, giving it to chief and council calling a community meeting, and then the community being exposed to a bunch of paper and say, well, we spent $50,000 on this report and we have our contaminated water issue solved. Well, it never did get solved. The paper went on the shelf and nothing was done. So that happened over and over and over again to almost every community in Ontario. There's 130 communities in Ontario. There's nearly 650 communities across Canada, First Nations communities across Canada. And we are strategically positioned within major waterways, and we have within our territories access to major holes of resources from forestry, mining, oil and gas, everything in between. So with that in mind, with no resolution, I said, well, isn't there anybody in communities that can really work and do this? And they said, well, no, we need capacity in communities to be able to deal with how do we interpret and interface with government, how do we interpret the data and the information coming from the consultants, and then more specifically, how do we develop implementation programs that bring these two things together to help resolve the issues that communities are facing, both internally and the ones that are coming from the external. So, so with that in mind, what began to develop was, well, if you need capacity, then why don't we develop capacity? Why don't we just do it? And adopting, our good friends at is it Nike that have that just do it. We're of the same mind, in particular as Haudenosaunee and as particular as Mohawks. That's our kind of mantra. That's our way of doing things. Let's just do it. So, in the meantime, I was very fortunate because Bob and his relationship with environmental studies. I had still been a graduate of Trent, and I had still maintained good relationship with the chair of Indigenous Studies. I think at that time it was David Newhouse. And so we brought Indigenous Studies and environmental studies together, and I kind of ran in between it because I had studied in both areas. And so I was very fortunate because we had very supportive administration and very four chairs that had great foresight and great vision and wanted to do something different and wanted to do something exciting. So I said, well, here's a niche that needs to get filled in communities. What do you say we create a program of Indigenous environmental studies and bring that together and see what it looks like? So they said, sounds like a good idea. It's never been done before. Why don't we give it a try? So that kind of led me on a crusade around the country. And I was fortunate enough to have a lot of support from communities. We spoke with elders, technicians that were working in communities, parents, children, some of the elders and the leaders. We spoke with clan mothers and faith keepers. And, we brought in academics, environmentalists, biologists, chemists, brought in people from government. We brought even in some agencies from that had business interests to help support the development of that program. Brought them all together and said, so if we're going to develop this program from an Indigenous context, looking at community, looking at elders, looking at our culture and language and our traditions, what do we need to include? So we need to start from the beginning, talk about creation, talk about our ceremonies, talk about our traditional way of life, our social organization, our form of government, some of the teachings and the prophecies that we have to inform people that they know exactly not just how we have developed and how we have lived on the land, but our intimate connection in both through historical perspective as well as into the future. Give them a complete understanding of that. Great. From the environmental area, what do we need to know? Well, we need to know basic biological functions and ecological functions. We need to know about the study of water, land, air, biological life. give people a good indication of what that's all about. So we brought that forward. From government, we need to know policy and regulation. We need to know those things that are affecting resource development or development period, but also those things that are implicit within the Constitution and within the provincial regulations around interactions with First Nations communities. So we brought all that stuff together, started to develop curriculum, and that's really what we did. We developed a curriculum based on sort of a cultural perspective that is the foundation of our programming and our understanding to include that with students. Well, let me back up. What became sort of very interesting? Well, let me finish with that. So we started with that. What emerged out of that strong cultural component was in the thinking of making change within environment. Because again, around that same time, we were faced with the issues around Walkerton, and my heart goes out to the people of Walkerton, the loss of human life there, and the tragedy that was suffered by that community. But that's just one of many communities throughout Canada and throughout Ontario in particular that are faced with those water-related issues, and we will continue to see more. We were looking at that, and we thought that began a process of really inspiring people to understand environment in terms of water and water contamination, and it created sort of a greater awareness and a greater depth of understanding and a greater urgency in understanding the issues that had created or that led to create Walkerton, and hopefully that work to resolve it. So there was an opportunity to take something forward, and it twinned human health and environment. It tied those two things together. If that's the case, and that there's a major driver between human health and the environment that we could use to begin to look at that, then why not study Indigenous people's health and our environments and look at the impacts and the correlation between those two? What we found was tremendous information and emerging research that's even continuing now that's looking at contaminants and toxins around not just exposure to cancers, but around heart disease, around rheumatoid arthritis, and in particular around diabetes and our link to diabetes. And as you know, as Indigenous communities, we are plagued with diabetes. So it's not just about eating right and getting exercise and changing your lifestyle. It's really also about your exposure to contaminants that is triggering that for us. So we thought, let's bring these two things together. We were very fortunate to hire in 2006 my colleague, Professor Chris Fergal. Many of you may have known him or know of the research that he's done over the last few years. He was recently nominated a year or two ago as one of the panels of scientists that were recognized by a Nobel Peace Prize for their work on climate change. So he was instrumental in coming here and bringing the idea of health and environment. So he's basically taken that. So in our process, then, what we've developed is an area of Indigenous people's health and the environment. Tied to that is the traditional aspect of that around traditional foods and medicines and Indigenous food systems. And then what we've been looking at recently, I'm going to run out of time here. What we've been looking at recently is the relationship, is the development of a programming that looks at natural resource restoration. So we're not focused on Indigenous communities, and in particular northern communities or communities that are not just Indigenous but local communities that are impacted by development from mining, oil and gas, exploration, what have you, forestry. It should be those communities then that have a leading role in the restoration work to mediate and to restore those degraded areas once that natural resource extraction industry has left that area. So what's the knowledge and skills that they're going to need out of that? So our focus then is not on development, and it's not a restoration, let me be clear on that, it's not an afterthought. It's well before the first spade goes into the ground. It's well before those board meetings take place with shareholders. Restoration is implicit within the entire development, not only just before, during, and after, but well on. And so you're looking at not just jobs for Indigenous communities and local communities of a few guys digging a hole or working heavy equipment. You're looking at jobs that are that span 20, 30, 50 years of a career of a particular development, and that those people then are implicit in making sure that that area is restored to as best it can to mitigate the damage that has been caused by the resource extraction. So from there, we talked about, we partnered with the Ecological Restoration Program with Sir Sanford Fleming College. In our next area that we've been looking at is around sustainable indigenous communities. So we've taken sustainability, and let me really give you a quick view of this. We've taken sustainability, looked at it in three parts. One is this idea of hardware, the other one is software and jellyware. Hardware is all of the infrastructural stuff within communities that enable a community to run. Water, landfill, housing, roads, energy. The software is the human part of it. It's the economy, the education, healthcare, social services, all of those things that are of a human activity. And the jellyware, and it's the part that's missing from an indigenous perspective, is what is the traditional thinking, the values, the goals, the ideas and concepts that are implicit within indigenous cultural ideas and practice that we can bring forward that will inform the development of new ways of doing our software and hopefully create new opportunities to develop new and innovative approaches to developing software or hardware, pardon me. So that became our focus on the areas of sustainability. The last area that we wanted to move into is an international indigenous environmental network. What are Maoris doing in relationship to mining? What are people from Australia doing? Central South America, India, Africa, Southeast Asia. What are people doing in relationship to dealing with an environmental issue, utilizing their indigenous knowledge, and at the same time utilizing the tools and the techniques of Western science and bringing those together to resolve the issues that they're facing. So that became the nature of what we do and the nature of knowledge interaction about how these two things become mutually beneficial. From there, we developed a program. We started out with a couple of courses. We ended up with about 30 students. Today, I'm happy to say we have 9 course offerings that we have. We have 2 faculty members. We have people that we bring in on stipend. We have a lot of guest speakers. And from that, we've got close to 200 students now. We have taken it from just a small course that was sort of an interest course. We were able to navigate that into an emphasis, so people taking our courses that were studying environmental studies or indigenous studies or anything else could get an emphasis on their transcript that said that they had an emphasis in indigenous environmental studies because they'd taken our courses. We moved from there to a specialization as we added more courses, and students then could get that on their actual diploma, their degree, that talked about a degree in environmental studies with a specialization in indigenous environmental studies. We went from there with the help of many people, including, in particular, Tom Willens from Trent, who was at the chair for environmental studies at the time, helped us to develop the process. So now we're a degree granting program, and we're the only degree granting program of its kind in Canada and in North America and really in the world. So you can get a 3-year degree in both the arts and the sciences and a 4-year honors degree in the arts and sciences in indigenous environmental studies. I'm not happy to say that we're the only ones because I think that everyone should have that, because here's what happened. Once we developed the program, and I'm going to quickly close with this, once we developed our program, what happened was that communities, our central focus was community. Once that was developed, government came on and said, you're training people within the areas of how to work with community, in the areas of natural resource development, and in the areas of environment. You're talking about sustainability, you're talking about a lot of really good ideas that we could use within government. Local, provincial, and federal governments became involved in recruiting our graduates. From there, business said, you guys are developing people that can work with community. We need people that work with community, because as we're going into northern areas or community where indigenous communities are, we need to have an interface with that, so we hired graduates. So we then partnered with industry and business to develop, I guess we should be partnering with them, to develop programs, summer programs, scholarships, internship programs, apprenticeship programs to be able to work with government. From there, we found that many of the NGOs and many consultants were also looking for people that had that kind of understanding at both the local and the regional areas, the provincial and national. And our understanding and working with indigenous communities and are looking at the necessity of bringing those two things together. Those skills are uniquely transferable And so there's been interest at the international level in the areas of research, and then also in the areas of within the academy of teaching, both at high school, at grade school, high school, and within colleges and universities, with people with this type of unique understanding. So you can see that we started out with a small program with just a couple of courses focused on working with community. It didn't take too long before we accelerated and were able to work in pretty well all aspects of our I guess really the economic opportunities or employment opportunities within Canada and abroad. So I'm happy to say today that we have students working in many different capacities within communities, within provincial and federal governments, within with consulting companies, with industry, and a lot of students teaching and going on to do graduate work at many of the universities, in particular at York University through the MES program and their graduate program there. So we're really pushing it, and we're really been well accepted. Our students, and just to give you an indication, this is not just for Indigenous students. Our program, I guess really the program is divided up. I shouldn't say divided up. If you look at the demographics in our community, we have a lot of about 20% Native students and 80% non-Native students. And out of that total number of students taking courses, we have students coming in from nursing, education, international development studies, environmental studies, Indigenous studies, sociology, philosophy, the master's program we have in sustainability studies. So we have a wide range of students and offering those ideas to students to make them better business people, better teachers, better nurses, better environmentalists, better biologists, better chemists. And so by offering that opportunity, we've been able to, and we've been very successful in moving our agenda forward. And at the same time, I mean, we're like everybody else, plagued with administration, not enough faculty, not enough money to do resources, but we just continue to push it, and we've adopted our mantra, just do it. And so I want to share that with you with the opportunity that just do it. And if you're interested in talking more about that, there's growing interest among colleges and universities. Our strength has been in developing a relationship with communities based on practical application work, working with community colleges, and working through articulation agreements into integrated programming through universities. So we were offering that type of underpinning, and we're suggesting that there's enough work to go around all across the country. So whether you're from BC or whether you're from the East Coast or Ontario or Quebec, there's a lot of environmental issues to go around. It enriches the minds of young students. They have a different understanding and a different connection to their understanding of the environment and their relationship to it. And as Paul talked about before, it's that connection. That's what we foster within it. And we do that in a very transformative way, that we embed this ideas and concepts from our traditional teachings that enliven students and begin, and I'm happy to say, to transform students, that by the time they come in first year, they're a different student by the time they leave in third or fourth year. They're grounded, they know what they want to do, they have purpose, they have responsibility, they have duty, and they are engaged learners. So I'm very happy to be able to share that with you in this very short period of time. So I'm very pleased and honored to be here. Thank you again for the invitation to participate. So, and again, my best to all of you and to your families. So,
You just said good luck. I have to go after that, eh? All right. Works, right? So I pushed all the buttons you said to push. Okay. So I took the title as the way I was going at it. I mean, a lot of what we've been talking about is what are environmental studies programs like, and so but I hadn't thought that way. I thought about making our scholarship useful. I kind of take environmental studies or environmental scholarship more than environmental studies. I take it for granted. I just say, okay, that's where we're at. That's what we're doing, and so okay, let's make it more useful. And I think that it begins with what we scholars are trained at. Careful analyses of what's going on. And this is what I mean by invoking, terminology like dismantling iconographies or symbolic violence, if you read the abstract. We're trained at systematically collecting data and unpacking it, at applying theory to explain the data, to explain what's going on here, uncovering what is hidden, and I think that's a very important aspect of what we do. We uncover those hidden dimensions, going beyond the taken for granted or the so-called common sense. And as an Alberta social scientist, I'd like to follow in the steps of Pierre Bourdieu, a French sociologist who I tend to use a lot of his work, whose approach was, in the words of one of his obituaries, he tried to apply the coolest, most methodical approaches to reframe the hottest, most burning issues of his day. I'm an Alberta social scientist. That's a good strategy for me to take. And I want to talk in two ways about two aspects of the research that I do. But what I'm sort of doing is sort of a reflexive sociology, turning the tools of sociology back on itself. I'm a sociologist, but you haven't got that yet. And to help us to rethink, and what Bourdieu said reflexive sociology means is the bracketing of ordinary presuppositions, and that includes the ordinary work of social scientists. And the principles ordinarily in our work, and it often presupposes a rupture with modes of thinking, concepts and methods that have every appearance of good and common social scientific sense. I'm constantly talking about things like, buy nothing days, carbon Sabbath, or Lent. These are ruptures in the ordinary. They're, Earth hour is not going to change our energy consumption in this society, but they make us think. They rupture the sort of the common sense in the everyday praxis. And that's important. In fact, they rupture the everyday practice so that we can begin to make it praxis, which means to really think and begin to theorize and explain what the collective social practices that have become sort of reified. And this sort of thinking, for me, is the hallmark, or this sort of mindset is the hallmark of good critical thinking, and that's the beginning of what I think we try to do with our students, and I hope that we also do in our scholarship as well. And it's the first part of making ourselves useful, to train people in this sort of rupturing, or at least questioning, reflexivity around our regular and everyday thinking. And the only way to effectively rethink what we do as environmental scholars and to truly become more useful is to rupture the tacit and routinized work that we do. Why do we publish where we publish? Why do we employ the methodologies that we do? Why do we engage in the sort of epistemological practices that we do? And we need a rupture. We need to draw on the resources from all over the place that are available. So it is amazing and awesome that Dan is here to help us question, the training that we've all received in the Western epistemology, and begin to reframe that very deeply embedded, the tacit habitus of our lives. And the only ways that we can really engage in that kind of reflexive thinking is to position ourselves so that we can be interrogated by other ways of being, ways of thinking. So, for me, the key research question is, given the knowledge about the environment that we have, why so little traction towards environmental sustainability? That unsustainable world that's in the subtitle. And there's lots more on that slide, and I actually thought I had it set up so it would bounce in, so you wouldn't be trying to read all that stuff. Well, I'm trying to focus on that question. I remember an argument in 2006 with David Suzuki, where he said, the politicians aren't getting it. We need better scientific communication to them. It's like, oh man, you're not getting it. We need the social scientists to get in there to explain why, societally, politically, what do we need to do different about communication? What's going on in psychology, things like that. This is where environmental studies really does a good job, because we try to bring this in to say that all this stuff is at play, and it's not just disciplinary boundaries, and we may not be able to capture it all in ourselves, in each of us as individuals, but by working together on teams and so forth, we can hopefully do a better job at it. Iconoclasm was in my title, so I have to nod to where I'm drawing it from. It's Jacques Ellul. Some of you may know him. He was born 100 years ago this year, so there's a number of conferences that I participated in some, so I've actually been reading his work. He's well known as a critic of technology, the technological milieu, or the way that technology, meaning not just the tools, the objects, but also ways of thinking, and the ways that we organize around technology, a techno-managerial mindset, all that kind of stuff has so dominated our society. It kind of says, well, what Marx said capital was doing in the 19th century, he feels that like technology is doing in the late 20th into the 21st century, completely reorganizing the ways that we think. And iconoclasm means to kind of dismantle the icons of our society, our technological society, to do a clasming of them. Cataclysm, destruction of the icons, which gets me back to Alberta. So I live in Alberta. A lot of people say, how can you stand it? And I tell them it's exhilarating. Being in the belly of the beast, then I can be an ulcer. I mean, come on. As an environmental social scientist, to stand in the epicenter of the battles for the planet, it's better here than doing it from somewhere else. At least I'll get more cred, a little bit more cred, at least in the debates in Alberta. And there's two epicenters to my own work right now. And those are the oil sands and the social contestations over them, and climate change. And I'm going to take the first one, or the second one first. And these give me a repeated opportunity to say that environmental problems are social problems. I mean political and cultural and economic, but they're social problems. They're not technical, natural science problems. They are, but we've got a lot of information. We pretty much know what's going on with climate change. And we're not even acting on what we know. So these are social problems. Environmental problems are how we have socially organized our society, the ways we think, the ways we use energy and resources, how we build our infrastructure, how we get around, move people, and move thought processes as well. So back to climate change. I was engaged in, we did this paper, Kari, Bob, and I, and then Kari went, presented it in London at this Planet Under Pressure conference. And if any of you are sociologists on the environmental sociology listserv, you know where this story is going. The first part of making ourselves useful, or another part of it at least, is to have courage. And it may be required of us. What happened with Kari is that the University of Oregon put out a press release, and this is a fairly high-profile conference. It's an intricate sociological theory paper trying to explain cultural inertia around climate change. It's deep and dense and, all that stuff that's really bad about academia. And one of the climate denier websites posted it front and center on their website. Something is sick and it's not the skeptics. The global warming faith, which means those of us who think that global warming might be happening. License the closet totalitarian. That's me, I guess. That's what they were saying. Down here, you can't really read it there, but they put Kari's name, they made a link to her faculty page, and a picture, and her email address, other stuff, and Rush Limbaugh picked up on it, and I actually thought I had the scan of his website, and shit hit the fan. It was brown in our world. Kari got hundreds of hate emails because of this. Her husband took a day off work to try to clear out her inbox. And, Bob took his faculty page down. People keep asking me, did you get anything? No, I hope that was the reason. I hope it's not because they ignored me. I actually kept saying, well, this is great. This is what we want to do. We want to look the devil in his teeth and kick the heck out of him. No, wait, I'm a pacifist. I'm not supposed to be. Anyway, making our scholarship useful might be about having courage and really engaging in the hottest and burningest issues of our day, but doing it with the tools of our scholarship. So back to Alberta and its oil sands. Do I really need to talk very much about it? Do you know most of this? Sort of enough of the details of it. All kinds of actors are involved. All kinds of stuff happening here. It's really an interest in cultural politics. And I've begun to see that as even more important than the political economic thing, which is why I use political ecology in my title, because that tends to move away from the political economics of of the environment and its resources, to include the cultural dimensions, especially as they play out in these other spheres. Cultural dimensions help to legitimate and reproduce eco-social systems and power relations, and cultural norms, and relations of production as we engage in extraction and utilization, disposal of the energy and the resources of our societies. Cultural aspects underpin the notions of nature and the human place in the world and form institutions. And as interdisciplinary scholars, we have people who are doing this work in all of your environmental studies faculty. I'm not actually in the environmental studies faculty, I'm a sociologist. Political ecology highlights the differential social relations that, by attending to the crucial role of norms, discourses, symbolic interaction, identity, institutions, and the social practices that are constituent of more conventional foci on politics and economics. And it tends toward, according to Paul Robbins, in his book on the topic, a, quote, normative understanding that there are very likely better, less coercive, less exploitative, and more sustainable ways of doing things. So there is a normative dimension, there's a values-driven dimension that, again, I don't think we can shy away from. I think we need to say, we are looking for better ways. And then what does that mean? If we're good with our analyses, we can begin to articulate the better ways, the less exploitative ways, the less coercive ways, and the more sustainable ways. You know what? I'm going to run out of time if I let you read all the cartoons that I have. So you probably want to read those more than listen to me. I mean, again, it's a cultural battle in Alberta around the oil sands, more than just a political economic battle. And so, you have, the Canadian flag up there. You have reports being put out by think tanks. You have other things going on here. Some people, we're aware of it. A lot of people are, and we make jokes about it, like this cartoon, Woo-hoo! There's more Alberta is Energy cartoon commercials on the air with the squirrels and the bunnies cavorting, the happiest place on earth. But that's hugely important. Support for Alberta's oil sands comes from, in my analysis, from two things. Not just the application of financial resources from corporations directly, but indirectly too. There's this battle over collective identity. The production of Homo Alberticus as Homo Energeticus. Alberta is energy. Energy is what makes us Albertan. I am Alberta oil. Man, if you're Jewish or you're Christian, that gives you, fingers rolling up and down your spine, because that's a religious claim right there. That's Yahweh. I am. But also, it comes from a logic based around a habitus and a culture, cheap petroleum, the social system powered by it. All this stuff is, that our social organization shapes the norms, the practices, the things that we do, and it scales up from the micro to the meso to the macro levels, and then reshapes the ways that we think, even as individuals and people. Back down to what's deeply internalized in us. So the statement that often I get is, do you drive? As if because I drive, I can't say anything critical. So that support for Alberta's oil sands is in a logic based around all those internalizations in the culture of the province, the automobility of our society, and things like that, reinforced by social relations, like that statement. So the iconography of a technological society, Putinsky gave me permission to use this, because when I saw the picture in the Alberta Art Gallery, I was just floored, thinking, wow, footprints in the sand, drenched in oil. That's who we have become, Homo petroleus. Which is why I think we need iconic plazas going on here. Okay, so all right, I'm not going to go through all of this. As our analysis, we actually start with 3 little case studies of a completely techno-managerial approach to dealing with some of the problems of the oil sands, and then it built up to even more, where you can see a very technological rationality, very formal rationality built just around what is the technological solutions for things. So in each case, a dueling science on the facts, And as technology reigns and other values, such as justice, are replaced by efficiency, get the system right. And then the next part of making ourselves useful is for imagination to have a central role. So we desperately need the humanities. We desperately need to think outside of the ways that we're trained to think. I've started using Charles Taylor's work on the modern social imaginaries to say we need ecological imaginaries as well. Taylor defined an imaginary in this way: the ways in which people imagine their social existence, carried in the images, the stories, and the legends. Social imaginary is that common understanding that makes possible common practices and a widely shared sense of legitimacy. Can you see that in the provincial support for the oil sands? Homo energeticus and automobility. Those are the stories that we tell in our society. And it shapes into there is no alternative unless we develop alternatives. All right, so one set of alternatives that I think we need to work on is to dismantle the icons of environmental studies, things like that, and to work harder at a more complete, genuine, and transformative sort of social inclusion. To go beyond sort of a liberal multiculturalism into a more profound and deeper multiculturalism, not a bringing of people into what we do, but the opening up of ourselves and expanding our own boundaries so that more people are included in what is being done and legitimized in what is being done. So I want to frame that as my way of thinking about social inclusion. And then skip Wade Davis's stuff. And then talk about environmental justice, because I think that that's one of the icons that in environmental studies we tend to talk about. And I ask the question of, are we really doing environmental justice? So this is some data from Howard Ramos at Dalhousie. He's got this research project where he's looking at press releases of a number of different social movement organizations. And I asked him to run the term justice on the Sierra Club's national press releases across the years of this data set. And this is what come out. They're not using the term justice. I didn't ask about equity and other possible things. This gives you an idea. 1 year, the term justice in a generalized way was used 6 times. But the thing is that I hear from a lot of people that environmental justice is becoming a more important way of thinking about the environment and bringing society and human beings and nature together to deal with environmental and do environmental policy. So I want to sort of dismantle that a little bit. Some Canadian research on environmental justice. We actually have a very limited set of actual scholarship on this, at least using that terminology. Okay, so there's a lot of other stuff. And one of the things that we argued in our book was that there's a lot of Canadian movements and activism that's not using that phrase. So Aboriginal activism, especially in Canada, is really environmental justice activism, just not saying that it is, okay? Not using that terminology. But then what I want to focus on a little bit here, I think I'm doing okay for time. Okay. Is this article that we published, Heather and I did. Heather is actually an undergraduate, so we published this in a decent journal, looking at the framing around environmental justice. Social inclusion is what we actually used. So just to quickly whip through a few things. We took Julian Adjumant's notion of just sustainability. He's got this pretend index thing, which here's the continuum that he uses. A 0 means no mention, and a 3 is pretty thorough kind of mention, and you see it in the programmatic material. We looked at Canadian organizations' websites, 49 of them. We did a sampling process across the Canadian Environmental Network and tried to get some regional distribution. And this chart does show the regional stuff, but you can see that there really isn't much substantive regional differentiation. But really, what you can see here is that very few environmental organizations in Canada are talking about things like justice and equity in any of their particularly visible materials. And by the way, the CEN includes things like the BC Indian Chiefs and the couple teachers associations and things like that. And those, when they did pop up in our sampling, those are kind of where these social inclusion indicators ended up being located, not in what you would consider as conventional environmental organizations. they still feel that they want to be affiliated with the environmental movement, and they are. And maybe that's a way that reflexivity can come into the environmental movement by listening more carefully to people who are aligned and affiliated, but may not be considered traditional environmental groups. So we use social inclusion, and this is kind of a master frame in social policy circles, and it's a variety of different ways to talk about excluded groups, bring them into to include them in society more. So anti-poverty, racism groups, immigration, inclusion, disability, gender, things like that. And these are the actual 7 that we picked out of a book from the Laidlaw Foundation with about 20 chapters. We just picked 7. And I want to point out this one here. One of them was inequality. I mean, that's a really generalized indicator that we use. But some people will mention inequality, but not be any more specific than that. But we wanted to try to capture it. So in other words, we're trying to be as generous as possible with this. And what came out is that 29 out of the 49 had none of those 7 in any of their website material, which you would assume is how they're trying to communicate to the broader population. And you can see the distribution here as it goes down across those 7. And then of those 7, here's which ones got talked about. Poverty, more than any others. Generalized inequality, immigration a little bit, multiculturalism a little bit, employment a little bit, gender very little, disability not at all. Again, that's only 49 organizations, a sample of the CN. But if environmental justice or a form of sustainability that is broader than environmental sustainability is going to be presented, I think we can move somewhere. This is another way of making our scholarship useful. So anyway, a couple new recent books. I encourage you to go pick up either one of these because, again, genuine inclusion requires rethinking our national and social imaginaries. So rethinking the gray-white north is about the historical geographies of whiteness. And there's a couple of chapters in Lynn Davis's book on Indigenous, non-Indigenous relations that I think would be really good for everybody, especially every white person. And I name myself in that category. Even though I keep doing this work, I keep realizing, man, I'm just a liberal. And it bums me out. But it's good. It's good to be bummed out, and it's good to think it. So anyway, just sustainability as a master frame, joined up thinking about the social and the environmental and what we can do and maybe the ways that we can generate new imaginaries. And Julian Adjaman framed it in 4 ways that I think encompass a lot of what gets done across all of environmental studies. Attention to equity, attention to living within ecological limits, attention to future and present generations, and then attention to quality of life. And his notion of it was as a proactive and a positive way of moving forward, not just a critique or a deconstruction, but also a reconstruction of what do we want to do here. Can you imagine if this oriented our research, our scholarship, our teaching? Can you imagine if these 4 as principles were applied to decision making in government level? And I can imagine like a Rose diagram sort of thing where we can use Federation of Canadian Municipality indicators to assess how well are we doing. Oh, we're doing pretty good in this way, but not so well in that way. Our quality of life's going up, but our living within ecological limits is going down. And we can, again, it's a potential for a measurable way of taking things. So back to iconoclasm. This, when you look at this, do you think of conflict? Or do you think of excellent dog training? Maybe if we work together to figure out how to open a can of food. Dorcetta Taylor, in one of her articles on environmental justice, said that those trying to develop new frames have to overcome the hurdle that many people, including would-be supporters, have or may have with the accepted, established, or hegemonic frames, which are normalized, tolerable. Ooh, anyway, I really like Wendell Berry. I'm going to end with this picture and this quote because it frames my life. Be joyful, though you have counted all the facts. We know the facts about the unsustainable world we live in. let's be joyful, imagine new possibilities, and work for them, and try to carry on other people with us as my go forth and sort of work. Thank you.